All right, good afternoon, CoMotion. Welcome to the 235 session titled Rising to Integration Advanced Air Mobility in Urban Geographies, such as places like Miami where we are today. I'm Sam Morrissey. I'm the Executive Director of Urban Movement Labs. We're a 501c3 nonprofit based in Los Angeles, California. We focus on facilitating true public-private partnerships between the public sector and private technology companies, always with the communities in mind. For the last year, we've been working with the City of Los Angeles on the topic of advanced air mobility, really looking at how we can truly integrate advanced air mobility into the fabric of the City of Los Angeles, consistent with the policies that have been put forth under the leadership of LADOT General Manager Salita Reynolds, who's been a champion in this realm in terms of any new transportation technology and how to make sure that that transportation technology does not leave anyone behind and does not create inequitable impacts. In Los Angeles, we've been focused on developing an integration manual to show how city agencies need to start responding today to start preparing for integration of urban air mobility and advanced air mobility into their various operations, whether that's on the Department of Transportation side, on the planning and zoning side, on the fire and life safety side, or the Department of Building and Safety side. So I'm excited for this panel today. We've got a great group of people. I'll let each person introduce themselves to my left, but Joe, please take it away.
Thank you. Joe Alesia. I'm the head of Vertiports here in Florida with Ferrovial Vertiports.
Good afternoon. Matthew Land. I am leading government relations and public policy for Air Mobility.
That's tough to follow. Beth Kigel. I'm with HNTV Corporation, and I'm a national practice consultant in the area of emerging mobility.
Nathan Trail. I'm the director of international state and local policy at Supernal.
All right, see, we're going to get
so
the cheer
unfair,
meter
Sam.
on here.
So unfair.
No, and this side's really not representing, so next time, please. So yeah, it's very exciting to me in the field of advanced air mobility to see the public and private sector really working together on a new technology. I think I'm seeing levels of coordination and information sharing that I don't think you see in other technology sectors. But I think that's because everybody understands the challenges and importance of integrating advanced air mobility into cities and states. Did anybody here see the 60 Minutes episode that was on this Sunday featuring advanced air mobility? If you did, you saw that there's still a lot of questions, and hopefully we're going to answer all, if not some of those questions today. But last, and importantly not least, is how do we make sure that this new technology is accessible, and how do we address the equity issues that are so persistent today? So I want to hear from our panelists. Spend 3 to 5 minutes and talk about your background related to this topic. What's the work you're doing on this topic, and how are you working to integrate advanced air mobility into cities? Joe?
Thank you. Guess I'll begin with the education, aviation management, architecture. Worked for several airlines for 9 years, then moved over to airports. Before leaving, I was the acting airport director at Chicago O'Hare. Then I moved over to AECOM for the AOR and ORAT in the Middle East, some of these beautiful airports that they're developing and building there that we only dream about here in the States. And then roughly 14 months ago, I began with Ferrovial for the strictly the vertiports business.
And how are you working on the integration of those vertiports here?
Integration
into the urban fabric of cities and.
So, a complicated question, but what we have learned, like you mentioned, working with municipalities, county, state, but probably most importantly is the community. If we don't have a buy-in from the community, we're going to struggle going forward. And the one thing that I'll take from my aviation experiences, there's not a lot of education done by the airlines or the airports. People are afraid to fly. That's one part. If we educate the community on noise, safety, impact, visual pollution is a new one that's coming up, I think that they'll see the value in it. It won't be a burden, or we're going to try our hardest to locate our vertiports so they're very minimum disruption. I think we could do great things together as a whole working group in the AA and UAM industry.
Great. Thank you. Matthew?
Yeah, thank you. So my background is in politics. I do not have an aviation background, so it's a lot of being a sponge and learning all about this entire industry. But I have been working in politics for the last 15 years in the state of Florida, working on campaigns, volunteering, managing campaigns, raising money for campaigns, and then on the political advocacy side, both at a local level, cities and counties, and then at the state level. Putting forward good policies that are very resident-focused and resident-driven, and working with those local commissions and councils to make sure that what the solutions we are trying to put forward for them are ones that are going to work for their community. I mean, I think that, and what we're trying to do here in bringing the advanced air mobility industry and get it to a place where we're able to be operational and scale, it's very similar. I mean, we have to work in coalition with each other. We have to work with our partners, whether they're infrastructure partners or energy partners and whoever else there is, and including local governments, and making sure that we're putting forward policies that are going to be benefiting their communities. So.
Thank you. And Beth, tell us what HNTB is doing here and across the U.S.
Sure. So HNTB, if you're not aware, we're an engineering consulting firm, but we really work with infrastructure owners on the public and private sector side to support all forms of mobility, from everything from the visioning of their concepts going forward to planning, to project management, construction management. So we're actually actively engaged in all forms of the transportation ecosystem. And one of the things you'll hear me say a lot is the word ecosystem, because as you've been listening to everything related to advanced air mobility, you're starting to get an understanding that we have the OEMs and the operators, we have infrastructure, we have regulatory with the FAA, we have the involvement of NASA. There's a whole ecosystem out there, including how do you engage with and educate the public. From an HNTB perspective, we actually are doing quite a bit of work in the space. Most recently, I see, I think Katie Zender is here somewhere, but she is our project manager for something that we're doing with the state of Ohio through Drive Ohio /Fly Ohio, and that has to do with the development of a statewide advanced air mobility framework. And what that framework, it will be published pretty soon, so be on the lookout for that. But what that framework has done is engaged various stakeholders in this ecosystem from the industry side, as well as public sector, not just in transportation world, but those that are involved in job creation, access, equity, and whatnot. The framework helps to guide certain questions that need to be asked as localities are being approached by various of us in the ecosystem, but also to educate on the background of what's happening with this. And the one thing I'll leave on, because I don't want to steal too much thunder of anybody else here, is that if there's one thing that we're all learning through this process is that this is an evolution of this emerging industry. Everyone is learning, and we're pivoting as quickly as we can to enable the ability to get yet another mode out to the public to be able to use.
Thank you. Nathan, what's Supernal's perspective on this?
Sure. So just quickly, by way of background, I spent about 10 years at a trade association representing technology companies. I worked mostly on emerging tech for state and local policy. So spent the majority of my time working on drones, UAS, and airspace at the state and local level, but also worked on ride sharing, micromobility, blockchain, fintech, and really got to see a lot of emerging industry scale and see what did work and maybe what didn't work. So Supernal is a part of Hyundai Motor Group, and we are developing an eVTOL aircraft for the AAM industry, as well as the associated infrastructure. And one of the things that we're really excited about is taking a collaborative approach towards integration, right? You know, I mentioned earlier learning from some other emerging industries about what did work and didn't work. I'm really encouraged by the approach that we've taken, which is to make sure that everything we do from our engagement, both at the policy level with governments to community, is a very collaborative effort. You know, we probably talked, you've heard today about the benefits of AAM. Can really only be realized by that close integration, right? Working with communities to identify where there are gaps in connectivity and how can this technology ultimately help that. One of the things we're also excited about locally here is we've recently signed an MOU with the city of Miami to do just that, to see how we can build this ecosystem in an equitable way and ultimately in a way that serves the community the most.
Excellent. So I heard a common theme among each of you, which was around engagement and education. Now, one of the questions that we often hear in doing our engagement and education is questions around economic development. Where will these jobs be developed? Will they be new jobs for people that commute into the downtowns from outside? Will there be jobs for people who have had limited economic opportunities and limited professional opportunities? And how do we weave equity into that discussion? Anybody who wants to step in on this question, please dive in. Nathan, you're putting the mic up.
Yeah, I'll just, I'm sure we all have similar things to say. I'll just touch quickly on this. One of the most exciting things about this industry is that the workforce will be mostly localized, right? It's not like traditional aviation where there's only a certain amount of facilities that can work on a large aircraft. There's a local, high-paying, high-skilled tech jobs for this industry that will be localized to the areas which have operations. So that's something we're very excited about. In addition, we're very excited to work with local universities on these training programs because these are new jobs that require new skills, new training programs. So in addition to the economic impact on the jobs, there's a new opportunity to have universities do job trainings as well.
And at the risk of being a little bit repetitive with that, but maybe to get a little bit more granular, and understanding that we have this discussion about equity. So there's the equity discussion in terms of the location of vertiports, for example, the access to the transportation mode. There is that whole other aspect in terms of job creation. And I know I'm going to see some heads nodding up here with my friends up here on this, but the opportunities for mechanics, the need for pilots, repair facilities on-site, heavy repair facilities off-site. What are the other job opportunities surrounding the operation of a vertiport? And actually, Nathan, I'm glad you mentioned colleges and universities. I don't know how many of you know this, but Miami-Dade College right here, they actually have a program called the Tesla Start program, where they partnered with Tesla to train Tesla technicians. And by the way, there's such a high demand for that, they can't accommodate them all. But that's an example of collaboration between our colleges, in this case community college, university, and other career training entities to be able to get ready to have the pipeline of workforce that's going to be required for this. And the certifications are quite achievable.
Yeah, and I think, just to continue on what Beth and Nathan have been saying, so Eve led a consortium with several other partners, including Skyports, L3 Harris, and CAMI, the Community Air Mobility Initiative. And, in doing this, developing this concept of operations, studying the eVTOL and the passenger journey going from Miami International Airport to the Miami Beach Convention Center, we started looking at those economic benefits. And we started looking at the jobs and talking with all of our partners, trying to figure out how many jobs could Miami-Dade County realize. We met with the Beacon Council and they said, listen, we want to make sure that when the advanced air mobility industry grows and scales in Miami-Dade County, that it's not just bringing jobs that require a 4-year college degree. We need white and blue collar jobs here for our residents. We anticipate, we expect, and of course, it depends on if the industry is going to scale like we believe at Eve that it will. But we expect that by 2035, we could have upwards of 6,000 jobs with an average salary of $53,000. And these are using today's numbers, not using inflation for 2035. So that's very exciting for what this industry can bring here. And I think, just what Beth and Nathan have said, it runs the gamut from the mechanics, it's those that are helping to support the eVTOL operations at our vertiports, baggage handlers, the pilots. It runs the gamut. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, I would just like to add to that. There's the jobs, but if we look at a restaurant today, we look at any industry, help wanted, help wanted, help wanted. Within aviation, it's even more difficult. Ferrovial dates back to the 50s. We've operated in owned airports all over the globe, and what we found, we've been working on this already almost 4 years now. Last year we made announcements. We're not very big on announcements, but we needed to determine before we came out to say that, yes, this can work. We did a lot of work. We continue to do a lot of work to ensure that the money that we're putting into the private funding, that we're going to get that return. And one of the things that we really had to look at are these jobs. Pilots, those are with our partners, of course, but that affects us. Your success is the success of the infrastructure. But as Beth said, there's dispatching, there's ground handling, there's customer service, and then there's other partners, first, last mile. And one of the things that we already committed to in Palm Beach, where we do have a lease, I believe it's the first lease for a vertiport in the United States at an airport, that we're committed to the community and also doing that reach out as well with the universities and get the diversity that we really need for this industry and all industries, really.
That's fantastic, and each of you touched on the many different facets, and Beth used the word ecosystem, and you also mentioned it's evolving. So, what steps are you in the industry taking now in terms of partnerships or infrastructure development to assist and facilitate this evolution, and then what steps are missing? Where do you need the public sector or the community to help out? If you want to start, Beth.
I'll jump in on that. So first of all, an understanding of HNTB, we're agnostic in terms of what the solutions are that are ultimately brought forth, because it's really about the communities, the priorities of those communities, and helping the owners of the infrastructure enable things that are going to propel their communities forward. But one of the things that we always are mindful of doing is we have to have a seat at the table, like right now. We have to understand what's coming. We have to help communities connect the dots between what's coming with technology, what are regulatory progressions that are occurring, and how does that translate into addressing needs or providing opportunities. So that's really the role that we play, and I'm excited about the fact that, I look out into the crowd whenever we're talking about AAM, we're sitting up here on the stage, and knowing all of the players in this ecosystem, including those that are responsible for airspace management, and those that are working with the FAA on things like how do you define corridors for this. So that's really the role that we play, and trying to be the best trusted advisor that we can be as localities, cities, states are trying to navigate this and help them be enablers to this in the way that they're still promoting safety, which is their number one criteria.
Yeah, and I would say EV mobility. So we are doing several things. We're developing an eVTOL, but I guess setting us apart from some of our colleagues is we aren't intending to operate ours. We are only selling and leasing our eVTOLs. So we have to work with our customers. Blade is one of our customers. We have, here in the United States, others like SkyWest and Republic. Down here in South Florida, Global X Airlines, it's a newer airline, but they have a letter of intent to purchase up to 200 eVTOLs from us. They intend to operate them from Sarasota down to Naples, and then on the east coast of Florida from Palm Beach all the way down to the Keys. So we have to work with our customers to see where the demand is for these, what kind of use cases they want to operate them in, where do they want to be operating, and then we can also not only work with the data that we have internally, but examining local governments and saying, if you want to fly in XYZ city, but yet that city is not prepared for operations, then that might not be the best market for you to enter service into. We have to work with our infrastructure partners and working with our customers that are purchasing our eVTOLs for operations and saying to them, okay, where are vertiports going to make the most sense? It is a walk, crawl, run approach, and that we expect that existing airports, the municipal airports and things like that, are going to be where vertiports are going to start off first. Then we can see some brownfield projects, retrofitting parking garage structures and so on and so forth, and then certainly having those standalone vertiport locations. And the demand from the community is what's going to drive those vertiport locations where they're ultimately going to be at. So it really has to be a collaborative approach. We're working with FPNL, who's one of our partners, to make sure that the energy requirements for recharging these batteries at the vertiport locations is going to be there, and thinking through if they need to get more energy to these locations. That permitting process for a city could take 6 or 9 months. We have to be working backwards and working with our local government officials so that our partners like FPNL can get the energy necessary to recharge these batteries.
Joe or Nathan? Joe?
Yeah, I'd agree with everybody. We have to do this together. You have OEMs, you have a lot of competition on the infrastructure side. We have a little bit less, but that doesn't mean we have that open dialogue. One of the biggest things that I would stress is that our vision, our goal needs to be as quick as possible, as smart as possible, and try to not create any barriers to that. And that's where working with the local government, the counties, the state, and the federal level, we have a want, and that want is to ease from getting from point A to point Z, zoning. I believe it was mentioned in the panel earlier today on the Miami network that there's regulation. We're going to have regulation, but we don't want to see those barriers. We want to see an ease. We'll educate. We'll go to the community. We'll give you the truth. I'm not a politician, so no offense. So, but we have to all work together with that same goal in mind.
Nathan, anything to add?
Yeah, just one additional thing to add that, when you think about building an ecosystem, it's obviously not just one vertiport at an airport to one area. It's a network of vertiports that are working together, and even more so, it's vertiports with multimodal connectivity, which is tremendously important. And when you consider that, and the transit authorities and state and local governments, their transit plans are 10 years out. What can we do now to be a part of that planning, right? How can we integrate this technology into those multimodal plans, into those transit plans, so that we're doing the right thing, so that it grows organically with other future mobility solutions? I think that's such an important part, and even more so that helps to guarantee that there is more of an equity of access as this industry begins to scale.
Can I add one thing to that? I think that's a great point, Nathan, and understanding that something like this can be complementary to an existing transportation network, and to really be able to look at it from that standpoint. I mean, when you really start talking about mobility for all, not every mode serves everyone, but if you can have an integrated network that provides a variety of options, plus has some of the other economic development benefits wrapped around it, that's really a great opportunity for a community when you're thinking about it as part of your entire transportation network.
Excellent. Matthew, I loved how you talked about the walk, crawl, run approach to this evolution, and you talked about where we might see vertiports, starting at airports. The FAA recently released a letter with some kind of general guidance and some preliminary guidance on vertiport development that I think from my perspective is a little bit not as forward-thinking as people might have hoped, but there's time. But how does that impact your industry, or how does that impact, for the four of you, how does that impact how you're thinking about this evolution and how you're thinking about this approach and integration into urban environments?
I mean, I think it probably, Joe probably has a lot to say on this, a lot to say on it. I mean, I think that the entire industry, we saw the draft engineering brief, and thankfully, the FAA is working closely with the industry to listen to our comments and our suggestions on it. I think that generally it seemed a little bit more constrictive than we'd wanted it to look like, right? But I think it's important to at least have that open kind of comment period for us to be able to provide some feedback to the federal government and say, listen, we asked for this. We asked for some guidance on this. And so we got some, and we might not have been quite as happy with it as whatever, right? But we're working through that. And I think that at the end of the day, whatever ends up ultimately coming out, we're going to conform with. We're going to have to. We sit there and think about this. We have these OEMs, Supernal and Eve and all the other OEMs that are out there. We're designing and building and certifying our eVTOLs, but simultaneously we have to make sure that our infrastructure is being built too. Because at some point in time, and for Eve, for us, we expect we will have our eVTOL certified in 2025 and in commercial operations in 2026. If that infrastructure isn't developed, our customers are going to take delivery of those aircraft and then can't fly them anywhere. So it's incumbent upon us as an industry to continue to work together and try to get the best product, so that engineering brief that ultimately does come out is one that is as favorable as possible for what we would like to see happen.
So several comments on EB 105, as it's known as. We already had a design for Palm Beach that was submitted to the FAA. What we did, we went with the let's not recreate the wheel, let's use existing aviation, fixed wing, and helicopter guidance, and that's the way we're going to go. So really, the effect of EB 105 on our Palm Beach location is it's minimum. The bottom line is it's going to be cost. And why I say cost is you need more space because of the landing areas, the FATO and the safety. So with that additional size, there's going to be additional land cost or land leases. But fundamentally, we're already working through that, and we're getting close to rectifying that design at Palm Beach, following this guidance, and let's call this the most restrictive. That's not finite, but down the line, it might become easier, and that will change. If you look at EB 105 compared to EASA in Europe, they're night and day. They're absolutely completely different, and I understand the FAA. They went through a lot the last several years. I'll leave it at that, and they just need to be careful and take the approach that they're doing. It's understandable. Yes, we would like it definitely a little bit quicker.
Beth or Nathan, any thoughts? Nathan?
Well, just to add, my colleagues here know I'm pretty far from an engineer, but I will say that our technical team is reviewing the document and will be preparing to submit comments. But just quickly, we certainly appreciate the FAA's leadership in this and their openness to accept comments and feedback, and we've been a part of a lot of these processes and look forward to continuing to work with the FAA on this.
Maybe I'll add one thing here, is that, when you look at the advanced air mobility ecosystem, it goes beyond passenger mobility. And when it comes to goods delivery, most of us are used to hearing about Wing and others delivering your coffee or delivering pizzas or things of that nature, but there is the large cargo aspect of that. So when it comes to EB 105, it'll be interesting to see what happens when you start talking about eVTOL opportunities for transporting heavier cargo, which I don't believe that's been addressed as of yet, and those use cases related to vertiports.
I mean, just to tag on to that, but the way I would look at that is I think it's, if the aircraft weight is limited to 7,000 pounds, if it goes autonomous, take away a pilot, you could get that. But if you look at an airspace approach, departure, I think that will stay the same, and I think the operations could be a little bit different, because also with cargo and freight, maybe the vertiport, yes, we could accommodate passengers, we could accommodate cargo, but they have to watch their costs. Do they want to pay for a landing fee with a terminal and all these boarding corridors, or are they going to want to do something separate? And we're more than willing to talk to any cargo companies on whatever they would like to do.
Great. And so moving from the federal level down, what are the differences, or are you seeing any differences across any U.S. cities or states when it comes to this integration, or how they're approaching AAM, and how might this impact the evolution of the industry?
I can start because I'll probably take the higher level view of this. One of the things that's really interesting when you look across the country, what's happening in one state is not necessarily what's happening in another state. For example, we're in Florida, we're talking a lot about Florida. We have our cities and counties here, Miami-Dade County, City of Miami, City of Orlando, Tampa, et cetera, even all the way up to Jacksonville, that are engaging and working with all of us envisioning going forward and kind of leading there. If you look at other states like Ohio and North Carolina, the localities are looking towards the state to lead that. Ergo, the Ohio statewide AAM framework. So you're seeing some differences from that standpoint. And the only other thing that I'll mention that's really kind of interesting is when you look at some of the regulation that has already been put in place by states and cities in response to drone activity, there are actually ordinances and statutes that are in place. They're not anywhere near the same, but they're put in place, and they could be, because they were a bit more reactionary to drones being out in the airspace, they'll have to be relooking at those, because today they could really conflict with where they want to go in embracing this part of the industry going forward.
Nathan.
That's such a great point. I mentioned earlier I spent the majority of my career working on drone issues at the state level, and Beth, you're absolutely correct. There are so many bills that were written for UAS, so for small drones, that were written in such a way before maybe AM was conceived or was widely understood, that would directly impact this industry. And there, of course, that's not the intention, but there is a need for a legislative review, and we've been working with some state legislatures just on that, so that we're not doing that as we're ready to implement this technology or ready to scale. We're making sure that we clean up the slight policy and regulatory measures early on. And then just one additional point, I've been really encouraged by the interest and openness that we've seen throughout the country on this technology. We engage in states and cities throughout the U.S., and some are further along. Florida, Ohio are great examples. They're really interested in this technology and are putting steps in place. But everyone who I've spoken to is at least interested, which is great to see. I mean, there isn't quite the skepticism that I think probably a lot of us saw with the UAS industry. There's an interest. So we believe, and I'm sure my panelists agree, that it's really our job to meet that enthusiasm with that educational outreach, to make sure that we're transparent, not only to explain where the technology is now, but more importantly, where it's going to be 5, 10 years from now, and what it would mean to those states and what it would mean to those cities.
I think I'd like to just separate one thing out. You had mentioned federal, and that's very important because the cities can't stop us from the airspace. The state cannot stop us from the airspace. That is the federal government. That is the FAA that owns and controls that airspace. It's the cities and counties and states that could create legislation, potentially, that could hold back this industry. If they put into place certain regulations that's prohibitive for the OEMs to fly, we don't have a business either. And that's a problem. Florida's been open arms. We're here today. There's many other states that we're looking at the demand and talking to them as well. But it's critically important that, as we mentioned before, that we all work together. We all have that same goal, knowing that there is competition.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add to this is that when it comes to cities and counties embracing new technology, especially new transit technology, sometimes they're so excited to embrace it that they're not willing to take the time to really study it and to make sure that they're trying to get it right. And I'm not saying that any state or any city or county is going to get it right with AM from the onset either, but I think that we can learn a lot of lessons from some other transit technologies that were rolled out possibly too quickly. And you can look at some other cities and counties that said, hey, we're going to just kind of wait and see how we should really develop this for our municipality. And there's others who have then expanded that technology within their cities and counties because they've seen it's worked very well. We are several years away from having an eVTOL into actual service. So we do benefit from having the time to study this and to work with the public sector and have the private sector to come together. The public sector does not have all the answers, and nor does the private sector. And that's somewhat exciting, and that we can all try to come together and develop those solutions together. So what are cities and states and what are the different ones doing? I would say, you're right, there are different things that each one of them are doing, and we are learning those lessons. And hopefully we do get it right in Florida, because every single person in this industry has their eye on South Florida. I think there's no secret about that. All of the OEMs do, all of the operators do. Everyone's very excited about South Florida.
Add one thing, sorry. And that's where, in our industry, we have to make sure they're getting the correct information. Earlier today, a panel with the mayor and the director of MIA, there was information that wasn't correct. And the reason why I say that, like I said, Ferrovial has been working on this for almost 4 years now. We've had discussions with the FAA and others, airspace analysis, demand analysis, cost, et cetera. And that's where, as a group, maybe using the likes of ACI or AAAE to bring us all together to have that voice. Because we all want our own companies to be successful, the OEMs, the infrastructure alike. But when we go to a certain official, they're going to hear our side, what's the best for us, maybe not as an industry. So I look at that as one of the most important things we need to do as a group.
Sure, Beth.
On that note, Joe, I'd love to give a shout out to Miami-Dade County. because the county commission passed a resolution to form a UAM working group that engages both the key departments from within the county, as well as many of us from the private sector. We were fortunate enough today to have, it was our second meeting, but the way that the county has established this is so that we can learn from one another. And when it comes to misinformation, we've seen this happen. I won't mention where or what, but it has to do with Express Rail. But we've seen things happen where there are myths out there because you're not having those communications. So then you have to work hard to dispel those myths while still addressing those real challenges and hurdles that you need to work through together, as well as leveraging opportunities. So I just want to give a shout out to Miami-Dade County for doing it in the way that they're doing it, because I think it will be good for all of us moving forward, and will help us in other engagements that we have all over the country.
That's excellent. Did you want to add something, Nathan?
Just one quick thing to add. It is a popular question, Sam. We have the rare luxury of time, sort of, with this industry, I mean, because it's so many years out. I mean, we've all been discussing so far. There are certainly things that we can do to be proactive now, and we all know that we should. But we won't assess the needs of this industry in one legislative session, right? I mean, if you gave each of us a yellow pad and said, write down everything that you need right now or in the future for the AM industry, we could probably take a guess at it, but it wouldn't be right in a few years, right? So it takes this early engagement, but probably more importantly, or equally importantly, it takes a very prolonged engagement, right? To make sure that we're consistently being a resource and being patient as the technology develops, as the understanding develops at the community level and with government, and to continue being a resource kind of over that prolonged engagement.
So the OEMs might have time, but on the infrastructure end, if we didn't start, we won't be ready for you guys in the 2 years. So we don't have the time, and that's why we really need to push gently forward.
Well, and as we talked in our prep session, we could go on and on for hours up here. I did want to say that we are open to questions from the floor. If anybody has a question, please step up to the microphone. I'm going to ask one question before that, though. Based on this discussion, on the discussion of FAA, I heard something that to me didn't sound like the previous years of tech saying, let's move fast and break things. What I heard was, let's move fast and get this right at the federal level, which I applaud. But then I'm also hearing that maybe at the local level, there's concerns about misinformation. There's concerns about local regulation attempting to supersede the federal regulatory authorities. At Urban Movement Labs, that's an area that we're very much focused on. And I would put out to the panelists here, what can cities do? If we can agree that at the city, county, state, and federal levels, the number one goal for AAM is safety, and keep ensuring the safe travel of both the people in the air and the people below it. What can and should cities be thinking about when it comes to that safety mission in terms of regulations, in terms of policies, in terms of infrastructure development that won't supersede the federal level?
That's a 3-hour conversation. I'll let somebody else speak.
It's a 3-hour conversation. I'll try to answer it in like 30 seconds if I can. But you're right. The old adage of the tech innovative industry, move fast and break things, doesn't work when you're talking about aviation that can transport people, right? That you want to do the exact opposite of that. Safety, I think, is the number one priority for us, for everybody, right? So in terms of what can municipalities, states do to embrace that, I mean, we recommend looking to FAA and adhering to FAA guidelines. That's why we have the safest airspace, because we have this harmonized landscape. And then additionally, setting up these prolonged task forces and working committees at the state and local level, which we're seeing throughout the country more and more each day, kind of assess the safety guidelines and the technical aspects of the industry over the long term.
Any other thoughts on this?
Listen, I think David did a fantastic job answering that question. It's true. I mean, I think that continue to have those discussions and talking to the subject matter experts within the industry. Eve was only born in October 2020. Our parent company, Embraer, has been around for many decades. We have certified over 30 aircraft in the last 25 years. So, looking towards, companies that have that experience and expertise in this industry, listen, safety is the utmost concern when it comes to all of this. It is the number one priority. And so, looking at looking at how we can make sure that our communities are still being safe like that, and ensuring that the aircraft that are being certified are the ones that are going to be coming to their communities and things like that. It's important to continue those conversations.
Well, and I would just say this, just like for vehicles on the ground, right? There is an authority that is responsible for certain requirements relative to safety. So like on the ground, it's NHTSA, right? In terms of roadworthiness, we have the FAA in terms of type certification. So certainly that's something for a locality to rely on in terms of safety of the actual mode of transportation. And then I would say anything surrounding the vertiport locations, very similar to other transportation facilities and things that you have to consider with regards to safety around that. And also an understanding of how corridor planning happens. And there are policies I know that LADOT is looking at in terms of what type of aircraft does it make sense to have flying over certain parts of their LA metropolitan area. So those are things that they can look at because, cities and counties, they do have the opportunity on the zoning side to address some of those opportunities and take care of some of the concerns. And that's why I know we probably sound like a broken record here, but in a very positive way. Those entities that are having these collaborative discussions right now, a lot of that can be addressed up front so that good, effective policies are put in place. I just have to say with my colleagues up here, particularly those that are OEMs, when you start talking about doing it and doing it right, it's so great to hear them say that. It's probably good for the general public to hear that, because at the end of the day, yes, they have investors that are expecting returns, but they need a sustainable business. And they can't afford to have to do that, let's put it out there and watch it break, in this case, to have a sustainable business.
I guess I'll have the final comment. So to simplify this, I think after listen to everybody else speak, is there's two things. We're not doing anything different when it comes to flying or infrastructure. We're doing it already. What we're doing is we're scaling up with a different aircraft with different technology. But the regulations exist already for communications, tower, TRACON, center, etc. That exist. We can use those. The difference is that instead of using a runway to take off, you're taking off like a helicopter. They exist. They transition in one of roughly 4 methods into a fixed-wing aircraft, flying, communicating just like any other aircraft. It's where that zoning, which is the second part, that's where I think is the biggest change, that we're needing to recreate groups or areas within cities for that aeronautical use.
Great. And I know I saw somebody getting up to ask a question. Please do approach the microphone and ask your question.
Good afternoon. Jacques Coulon with the City of Orlando. Nice to see you, Matt. So what are the questions that we should be asking as a city going through these planning efforts of OEMs and of infrastructure providers when we approach you? What do you think we need to be asking you to get the best information to move forward and make really good, informed decisions?
I'll start us off, and I'll just take the narrow lens of policy because that's what, my main sector. You could ask, what are the current regulations and policies that are in place now which could maybe inadvertently prohibit operations? It's something that Beth brought up earlier, but I think it's such a good point. It's such a new industry. There are current laws on the books which may need to be modified, and then there's going to be new laws and regulations which will need to be implemented to enable this technology. And of course, those take time. So from my perspective, something that would be great to hear, and I know it's certainly already happening in Orlando, but other cities as well, is to start having that conversation, start that collaborative process of the review, both from the city to do that review, and then the OEMs and the infrastructure companies to provide a perspective of how these operations will look and what that would mean for policy and regulations at the local level.
Yeah, and something else that I would offer to you, Jacques, and to anybody else is that most of us are global companies, right? So while you are obviously hyper-focused on City of Orlando, we are working across the world. So yes, Eve Air Mobility led a consortium to develop a ConOps here for Miami-Dade County, but we also did one with Air Services Australia, studying the airspace integration. We did one in the UK, thinking about those regulatory barriers. We're doing one right now with Japan Airlines. We have, so we sometimes have access to some of those materials that can help guide cities and counties. Because what we are finding in developing these concepts of operations is that there's universal lessons that can be applied literally anywhere. It's not like these, it's nice to find these similarities across the spectrum. So I would say, challenge those OEMs, challenge those infrastructure partners that are coming to you and asking you like, hey, is there someone else that's maybe doing this right already? What can we learn from them? Because oftentimes, and I think this comes to any policy for any local government, it's not about recreating the wheel, it's just about making sure that your wheel is running correctly. And so I think that's what's really important too, is that we might have access to public documents, private documents from our own companies that we can share with you to help give you that kind of guidance and expertise. And I think just bringing everybody together is extremely important. But making sure that you're doing what's best for your community, because what the City of Orlando is doing may not be the best, it may not be what City of Tampa wants to do, may not be what City of Miami wants to do, may not be what City of Miami Beach wants to do, may not be their approach, because they do represent different types of residents. And so it's making sure that the approach that you're taking is going to be best for your constituents. But I guess I really do think that leaning on the industry, oftentimes, we can help guide, and certainly, we just might have access to stuff that can be helpful to you.
Another thing that I would say you'd want to look at is this ecosystem doesn't operate in a vacuum, right? So the aircraft has to take off from somewhere and land somewhere else, right? So when we talk about collaboration, it probably goes beyond the boundaries of the city, because not every trip is going to take off and land within the city boundaries. So what kind of conversations can you be having with other localities that are very interested in doing this, in conjunction with the OEMs and the operators and the infrastructure providers that are probably already looking at this from a business model standpoint, that can really help you navigate as to where to have those conversations. And one last thing I'll mention about that is, we've had a lot of discussion here about economic development. So starting to ask questions, but also brainstorm and provide information in terms of, here are some real needs that we have here, and how can this be leveraged or be a part of a way of addressing some of these needs and providing opportunities in a much broader economic development sense. We've talked about job creation, we've talked about where are these placed, how does that in fact impact the communities where they're placed. So where might there be a need that would say, hey, if everything, all things being equal, if everything lines up, this would be the best place to have this, and this would be the best place to grow a workforce and whatnot. So just being sure to ask those questions as well.
That's a great question. I appreciate that. I think probably one of the biggest is myths and assumptions. Jetsons, The Fifth Element, Back to the Future. That is not day number one. It'll be very few. Crawl, walk, run, as always is mentioned. So I think the other part of that is I look to some of my colleagues. Within three of us, we have almost 90 years of airport and airline experience. I am the youngest, so who's hiring tomorrow? But ask us the questions, reach out. These are the teams that we put together. We're putting the best of the best. And when you have something new, you have to wear multiple hats. You have airports, airline, architecture, flight, regulation, on and on and on. And the team that our CEO, Kevin, put together covers that and beyond. We wear multiple hats. Reach out to us. But be careful of those myths. That's where the education to the community, these are quiet. They are not burning fuel. They are not spilling into waterways. So those are just a few of the things. Pros. What are the cons to prevent us from coming into a certain area or not change the zoning for us?
Just something really quick, and I don't think we've touched upon this enough in this panel, and we didn't touch enough upon it in the UN working group meeting this morning, it's community engagement, right? And how can we help with community engagement? How can we help provide you with the real information? These are going to be 80 to 90% quieter than traditional helicopters of the same size. That is what Eve expects. And I think that's what many of my colleagues in this industry expect as well. We expect that costs are going to be for the passenger are going to drop drastically once we have autonomous operations and once we really truly scale and things like that. Just kind of thinking through that and educating the community on it is extremely important for this. It's we not only have to educate the elected officials and members of the administration on this industry, but it's the community itself. I mean, they're the ones who are going to be taking these, and if they are skeptical of it, this industry is not going to boom like we expect it will be. I mean, there's been, I don't know, something like 2010 to 2020, there's about $6 billion invested in this industry. From 2020 to 2021, I think there's a little more than $7 billion. So in a one-year time period, there's been more money invested than in the previous 10 years. The industry certainly thinks that this is going to happen. We believe it is. But we also need to be working with our communities to make sure that it does grow and scale like we expect it will.
And I just want to add to one more myth that's out there, because in communications I have with whether it's someone in business or just a general member of the public, they really view this like what we've been seeing with drones and the automated operation. They think that's where we're going to start in the US today, and we're not. We're going to start piloted. However, in enabling this industry to really take off and scale so that ultimately we can get to that unpiloted automated travel, when you can really scale it, you can reduce the cost of access and really broaden your reach to others in the community. That's really valuable and important, but it gets back to the crawl, walk, run, and effectively communicating that to members of the public that initially you're going to see a pilot in this aircraft. So let's start there and then talk about how that creates possibilities down the road. That's a necessary first step to get this to scale so you can offer it to more and more within the communities.
And I'll use my bully pulpit as the moderator to add that this is exactly the work that Urban Movement Labs is working on. We're trying to help the city of Los Angeles figure out those questions that they need to ask. So let's connect after this, because we're going to be putting forth a document that will actually really answer those questions in terms of what federal regulations you need to watch for, how do your city operations need to adjust. There's a lot of talk here about zoning. Zoning is an output of a planning policy. Planning policies require new land use definitions and new definitions of terminology. All of that work needs to happen quickly to meet the needs of infrastructure, which will be here sooner than we expect. So we have 3 minutes and 37 seconds left according to the timer, so 30 seconds each. As Joe mentioned, this is a new form of aviation. Aviation is something we've lived with for over 100 years. How can we look to the evolution of aviation in the United States? What should we look for? What haven't we discussed? What can we learn from those lessons? And let's just run down the line. We'll start it with Nathan, because Joe always gets the last word here.
Sure. So, I mean, when you look at traditional aviation, I'd say the most glaring thing when we talk about what can we learn from traditional aviation, it's adhering to that safety standard that commercial aviation has. But we can also learn that we can right a lot of the historical wrongs from the aviation industry, right? I mean, we've all discussed making sure that this is more accessible and equitable, which is important. But that means many things, right? It doesn't just mean, which is important, but it doesn't just mean making sure that there's connectivity in areas which lack. It doesn't just mean driving towards affordability. We really have the chance to do this right, which includes making sure that this is accessible to people with disabilities, which traditional aviation is not. So we really have the chance to right a lot of these wrongs, and we're committed to doing that. And it's something that we're so excited about with this industry.
Thank you. Beth?
Yes, and I just will agree to with what Nathan has said. But in terms of lessons learned from aviation, and we've seen this pivoting going on, we talk about evolution, is that, airports are shared facilities with various airlines, various operators and whatnot, and they're also and oftentimes destinations. So I think there are some positive aspects in terms of how the aviation world has evolved that we can take from as we move this forward to provide more opportunity to enable and expedite in a very safe and efficient manner.
Yeah, so I mean, as Nathan says, we talk about accessibility, but I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people in the space. At Eve, we are designing our eVTOL with a very human-centered approach. We want those that are mobility impaired to be able to access our eVTOL. We want to make sure that the infrastructure being built is accessible to all. We know that until this industry really grows and scales and it's attainable for more of the population, it's not going to be accessible to everybody, but it does provide a level of access to transit that can complement the existing ones out there already. So, maybe you have somebody that does live down in Homestead who their doctor is at Jackson, and they do need to take an eVTOL to get there, because for them, even though it is a little bit pricier for them on the onset, that accessibility to their doctor is extremely important to them, and so they're willing to pay that additional money now, while the community is kind of growing in that acceptance. So we look at accessibility, exactly like Nathan said, so many different ways, and we do want this to be accessible to all.
Close this out, Joe.
Thank you. So as I mentioned, Ferrovial has operated some of the busiest and biggest airports in the world, and our team separately. So the one thing, that I'll say, words of my CEO are, trying to unlearn aviation, or specifically airports. We have that background, but we have to, I hate this phrase, think outside the box. We have to not recreate the wheel. It's hugely important, and with that, I'll just leave it alone. Otherwise, we'll be here another hour.
Well, please thank this panel. I need to hear from this side too, cheering, because we heard all the fans over here. But thank you, everyone. Great conversations. We went off topic a little bit, but let's continue this 3-hour conversation later. Thanks, everybody.